Welcome to my channel Deep Sleep Mission-DSM. As we begin, I would be delighted if you could share your location in the comments below. It's truly inspiring to witness how far this content travels and to connect with viewers from across the world. The manila folder was sitting on my doorstep on a Tuesday morning. No package tracking number, no return address, just my name written in neat, clinical handwriting. And when I opened it, I found 18 pages of detailed therapy session notes about me. From a therapist I've never met in my entire life. The story begins let me paint you the scene. I'm living in a modest 2-bedroom apartment in Portland, Oregon. Nothing fancy, just me, my rescue dog Murphy. And the kind of quiet routine that most people either find comforting or absolutely maddening. I was the comforting type, or at least I thought I was. That Tuesday morning started like any other. I shuffled out to grab my Amazon package from the porch, except there was no Amazon box. Just that folder. Cream-colored, weathered at the edges like it had been handled a lot, like someone had opened it repeatedly over months or years. My first thought was administrative error, wrong address, wrong person, but the handwriting on the tab said my name, Margaret Ellen Westbrook. Not Margaret, not Ellen, not Westbrook alone. All three, the way my mother used to say my full name when I was in trouble as a kid. The door was still open behind me. Murphy stood in the doorway, his tail making lazy circles in the air. He's a good judge of energy, dogs always are. And he wasn't wagging anymore. He was watching me, studying me almost, like he already knew what I was about to discover. I went inside, shut the door, sat on my worn living room couch, the one I got from Facebook Marketplace for $40, and I opened the folder. The first page had a date. July 14th, a Tuesday, exactly 1 year ago. Before I even registered what I was reading, my hands started trembling. These were session notes, clinical, detailed, written in the format I recognized from my own therapy sessions with Dr. Patterson downtown. But Dr. Patterson hadn't written these. The handwriting was similar but different, more precise, more aggressive in its penmanship, like whoever wrote this was pressing harder into the paper than was necessary. The notes described a patient with anxiety, panic attacks at grocery stores, difficulty sleeping. A recurring dream about standing in a hospital hallway that led nowhere. I had never told anyone about that dream, not even Dr. Patterson. My mouth went dry. The kind of dry where your tongue feels like sandpaper against the roof of your mouth, like you've been screaming. Even though you haven't made a sound, I kept reading. Page after page of session notes from dates that felt familiar. Dates when I should have been at work but called in sick. Dates when I remembered feeling watched. Dates I couldn't quite account for. Dates that were there in my calendar but felt blank when I tried to remember them. But here's the thing that really got me. The sessions were described as hour-long appointments, weekly, every Tuesday at 2 p.m. for 18 weeks, and I had zero memory of any of them, not even a vague recollection. No calendar entries, no receipts on my credit card, nothing. It was like those 18 weeks had been edited out of my life, like someone had taken a red pen to my personal history and just crossed them out. The therapist's signature at the bottom of each page was illegible. Just a scrawl that could have been anything. Dr. S. Harlow, the letterhead said, but when I Googled that name later that morning, nothing came up, no practice, no website, no reviews, no existence at all. I tried variations, Dr. Sarah Harlow, Dr. Stephen Harlow, Dr. S.H., no results. It was like this person had written themselves into my life, but not into the world. I called Dr. Patterson, my actual therapist, the woman I'd been seeing for 2 years at her office downtown, the one who wore those oversized glasses and always had tea brewing in the corner of her office. Margaret, I pulled your file. Our sessions were on Thursdays. You never missed one, and you definitely weren't seeing anyone else. She said it like she was reading from a script, or like she'd already thought about this before I called, which was worse, much worse, much worse. It meant I wasn't the first person to call her about something like this. Do you know anyone named Dr. S. Harlow? I asked. There was a pause. The kind of pause that means the person on the other end is choosing their words very carefully, weighing them, testing them before they let them out into the world. No, she said, I don't. Where are you right now? I told her I was home. She asked if I could come to her office that afternoon, not as a regular appointment, but to talk about something specific. She wouldn't say what over the phone. The way she asked. It was like she was confirming something she already suspected, like she'd been waiting for this call. And I was just the latest person to make it. The drive downtown took 20 minutes. Portland in the summer is beautiful, green, lush. The kind of place that makes you feel like anything could be alive in the shadows. Anything could be watching from behind the trees that line the highways, from inside the coffee shops you pass, from the windows of the houses you drive by. I kept the folder on my passenger seat, every red light. Every moment the car slowed down, I found myself reading another page, trying to find, what? Evidence that I'd written these myself, some marker of my own handwriting that would prove this was some elaborate prank, some twisted game someone was playing. But the thing about memory, the thing nobody really talks about, is that when it's not there, it's not there. It's not like a foggy recollection. It's not like forgetting where you put your keys. It's an absence, a void. And that void was starting to feel like something with weight, something with intention. Something that was looking back at me. Dr. Patterson's office is on the third floor of a converted Victorian house. Cream-colored walls, soft lighting, the kind of deliberately calming environment designed to make anxious people feel like maybe everything would be okay. It wasn't working today. The walls felt like they were closing in. The soft lighting felt like it was hiding something in the shadows. She looked different that day, older maybe, or concerned in a way that added years to her face. She read through the notes slowly, her eyes moving side to side, her lips moving silently like she was reading the words out loud in her head. And I watched her face the entire time, waiting for something, recognition maybe, or shock, or the moment when she would tell me that all of this was explainable, that there was a logical reason for this folder. This documentation. This presence, that moment never came. "These are detailed," she said finally. "Whoever wrote these new things about you, specific things, your mother's name was Ellen, your nightmare about the hospital hallway, the way you tap your finger 3 times when you're anxious. These aren't guesses, Margaret. This person, or persons, they had access to information you've only shared with me. I hadn't even told her about the finger tapping. I was certain of it. And yet, she knew, and now she was saying the notes mentioned it. Could there be some kind of HIPAA breach?" I asked. "Someone hacking into your office?" She shook her head slowly, like she'd already considered this, like she'd spent the hours between my phone call and this moment working through all the possibilities. "Our files are encrypted, triple redundancy, and besides, there's something else. There's something else." She turned one of the pages toward me, her finger pointing to a specific entry. "Look at this entry, from August 4th. It describes you sitting in the waiting room, wearing a gray sweater, reading a book called The Silent Patient. It says you were anxious about an upcoming presentation at work. That your leg was bouncing. That you checked your phone 7 times in 10 minutes. I did have a presentation that week, and I'd worn my gray sweater, in Dr. Patterson's actual waiting room, with her. The book was right, the leg bouncing, the phone checking, all of it was right." "I wore it here," I said, my voice sounding strange, distant, like it was coming from somewhere else, "to our session." "Exactly, but you never told me about the presentation. I only know because of this unknown therapist apparently documented it." She set the page down carefully. Like it was radioactive, like touching it too much would somehow transfer the wrongness of it to her. "Margaret, I think someone has been watching you." Those words hung in the air like they had physical weight. Watching, present tense, not watched in the past, not some isolated incident. Watching. Ongoing, continuous. Like it was happening right now, in this moment, maybe in this room. I didn't sleep that night. I tried. But every time I closed my eyes, I saw that handwriting, clinical, precise, taking notes about me, about my life, about my thoughts. Murphy could sense it. He stayed in the bedroom with me, on the bed, which was unusual. He normally slept on his own dog bed in the living room. But that night, he was right beside me, his warm body radiating presence, or maybe just offering witness to whatever was happening, like he understood, like he'd known all along. I kept the folder on the nightstand. In the dark, I could feel it there, like it was emanating some kind of low frequency, some kind of pull, around 3 a.m. I turned on my phone light and opened it again. New pages. I swear to you, there were new pages. Pages that hadn't been there that morning. I counted them 3 times. This is the part where you probably think I'm losing it. This is the part where the story gets harder to believe. But I'm telling you what happened, what I witnessed, what I can still see if I close my eyes. These new pages were dated the current week. This week. One was dated the day before I found the folder, July 13th. It described my morning routine in excruciating detail, walking Murphy around the block at 6 a.m., stopping at the coffee shop on Morrison Street, ordering a vanilla latte, sitting on the bench outside for exactly 12 minutes. Watching a jogger run past, thinking about my ex-boyfriend David for the first time in months. I had done all of those things, and I had thought about David. No one knew that. No one knew that. No one could have known that unless they could read my mind. The other new page was dated to yesterday evening, July 14th, the day I found the folder. It described me sitting on the couch, reading the original pages, my hands trembling, my chest getting tight, the way I kept checking to make sure Murphy was still there beside me. It described my emotional state with more accuracy than I could have. It described the exact pattern of my breathing, how it would catch sometimes, like I was forgetting how to breathe normally. It described the moment I called Dr. Patterson, what I said to her, what I didn't say to her. Someone wasn't just watching me, someone was documenting me in real time, writing about me while it was happening, which means, in that moment, while I was reading about the previous day's page, there was someone writing about that exact moment, right then, right there, maybe in the room with me, maybe outside the window, maybe somewhere I couldn't see, but there nonetheless. My apartment suddenly felt too small, too transparent, like the walls were paper thin. I went to the windows, all the blinds were closed. I checked the locks on the doors, all secured. I even looked in the closet and under the bed like I was 8 years old again, like there was a monster that could be hiding in plain sight if you just didn't look carefully enough. But what if it wasn't hiding? What if it was just invisible? By the third day, a pattern emerged. And once you see a pattern, you can't unsee it. It's like those optical illusions where suddenly the image flips and you see both things at once. The vase and the two faces. You can't go back to not seeing it. Every morning, a new page would appear. Sometimes it was tucked into the folder. Sometimes it was on my kitchen counter next to my coffee mug. Once, it was on my pillow next to me. I don't know how I didn't wake up. I'm a light sleeper. Any small sound pulls me to consciousness. But that morning, I woke to find fresh notes about my dreams. Detailed descriptions of the nightmare I just had, the one where I was in the hospital hallway. But this time, someone else was there with me, someone whose face I couldn't quite see. The handwriting remained the same throughout all of it, precise, clinical, detached. Like the person writing was observing me through glass, like I was a specimen, a case study, a patient. Each entry documented my movements with surgical precision, my thoughts when possible, my emotional state, my conversations with Dr. Patterson, conversations that happened in private. Conversations that happened over the phone when I was in my car driving to work. But here's where it gets specific. Here's where the cozy part of cozy horror comes in, because I was still going to work. I was still walking Murphy. I was still buying vanilla lattes. The world hadn't stopped. My life hadn't paused. It had just become documented. Like I was living inside someone else's movie, and they were narrating it, narrating every moment, every breath, every thought I thought I was having in private. On day 4, I did something I shouldn't have done. I stopped being careful. I stopped checking the windows. I stopped locking every door. I stopped acting like someone was watching, and instead, I tried to prove they were there. I tried to catch them, or at least force them to make a mistake. I went to a different coffee shop, not Morrison Street. A place called Brew Haven on the east side of Portland. A place I'd never been before. A place that wasn't on any map of my routine. I ordered a cappuccino instead of my usual latte. I sat outside for exactly 5 minutes, 43 seconds. I did this deliberately. I wanted to see if they would document this new, unexpected behavior. The new page appeared that evening. It was waiting for me on the kitchen table. It described the coffee shop with stunning accuracy, the cappuccino, the specific bench I sat on, the exact duration, down to the seconds. Even down to the detail that I'd been thinking about whether I was losing my mind while I sat there. But there was something else on that page, something that made my blood go cold. There was a photograph. It wasn't attached to the notes. It was just there, printed on the page. It was a picture of me, sitting on that bench at Brew Haven. From that day, the image was taken from across the street, at a distance, but it was clearly me. My face was visible. My cappuccino was visible. The timestamp on the photo was 2:47 p.m., the exact time I'd been sitting there. But I hadn't seen anyone. I'd looked around. I'd tried to spot whoever was watching me, and I hadn't seen a soul. That's when I realized. Whoever this was, they weren't trying to hide anymore, or maybe they never had been. Maybe they were just so good at hiding that hiding was invisible to me. Maybe they were so integrated into my world that I couldn't distinguish them from the normal background noise of life. "You were there," I said to the empty apartment, my voice cracking slightly. "You saw me that day. Where are you? Who are you?" Murphy came over, rested his head on my knee. His eyes were full of something I couldn't quite name. Concern, fear, recognition maybe, like he understood something about this situation that I didn't, like he'd always known something was off. And now, finally, I was catching up. That night I made a decision that most people would call stupid, that a therapist would probably recommend against. I decided to go somewhere I'd never been, somewhere that wasn't on any routine, somewhere totally random. A middle-of-the-day trip to a hardware store in a part of Portland I'd never visited, a part that felt isolating, industrial. Empty parking lots and chain-link fences, the kind of place where someone watching would have a hard time blending in. I bought a single item, a light bulb. It made no sense, but it was the most random purchase I could make. I paid cash, no record, no trace. I walked around the store, twice, looking at things I'd never consider buying. Hammers, drywall screws, extension cords, plumbing supplies. I lingered in each aisle. I was testing them, testing whoever was watching. I left. That night, no new page appeared. For the first time in days, no documentation, no evidence of presence. For exactly 6 hours, I felt free. Like whatever this was, it had limits, parameters, patterns, and if I could understand the pattern, maybe I could understand the person behind it, maybe I could find a way to stop this. But then, around midnight, the page appeared. It was different than the others. The handwriting was shakier, almost frantic, like it had been written quickly, with agitation, with frustration even. It described the hardware store, every detail, including the light bulb I bought. It described my purpose, my experiment. It described how I was trying to lose the observer, trying to find the limits, trying to catch them. And it described my momentary sense of victory when no page appeared. And at the bottom, in handwriting even more unstable than the rest, like it had been written with trembling hands. Just 3 words. I see everything. The words weren't just written, they were underlined, multiple times, like whoever wrote them was emphasizing them, driving them home, making sure I understood that there was nowhere I could go, nothing I could do, no escape, no blind spots, no way to hide. After that night, something shifted. I stopped being afraid in the way I had been afraid, that nervous. Vigilant fear, the kind that makes your stomach hurt and your thoughts race. Instead, I became curious, which is its own kind of fear, but differently flavored, darker maybe, more dangerous. I started writing back. I took a blank notebook, and every morning I left a page on the kitchen counter. "Who are you?" I wrote on the first one. "Why are you doing this? What do you want from me?" It felt absurd. It felt like I was losing my mind. But here's the thing about living with a presence. Real or imagined, acknowledged or ignored. You start to have a relationship with it. You start to treat it like a conversation partner, even if only you can hear both sides of the dialogue. The responses came quickly, within hours sometimes. The response to my first question came before noon. A new page in the folder, the handwriting steady again, controlled, like whoever was writing had regained their composure. I am your record keeper. Everything you experience deserves documentation. You have been watched because you deserve to be watched. Your life has been authored by me. Every moment, every breath, every thought. Your existence is my narrative. And narratives require an author. You are my life's work, my masterpiece. And I am the only one who truly understands you. I know you better than you know yourself. I know your potential, your pain, your capacity for growth. And I am here to guide you toward your true self. You should thank me. I sat with that for a long time. The coffee got cold in my mug. Murphy dozed on the rug, and I thought about what that meant, what it would mean if someone genuinely believed they were authoring my life, that my consciousness, my choices, my free will, was all just part of their creative process, that I was less like a person and more like a character they'd created, a role they'd written for me to play. The scariest part of that realization wasn't the invasion of privacy. It wasn't the violation of boundaries. It wasn't even the violation of my agency. It was the question it raised about my own autonomy. If someone had been documenting every choice, every decision, every moment, how much of my agency was actually mine? How much of my life was I just playing the role I was supposed to play? And how would I even know the difference? I wrote another note, my handwriting getting more erratic the more I wrote. If you're writing my story, let me see all of it. Show me everything. Show me who I really am according to you. I need to know if I'm real. I found a new folder on my kitchen table. Thicker than the first, much thicker, hundreds of pages, thousands maybe. I opened it with trembling hands, and immediately I knew the scope of this, the depth of it. It wasn't something that had started a year ago. This went back much further. These pages went back years, decades even. They documented events I'd forgotten about, conversations I'd never recorded, moments I'd experienced alone, times when I was certain, absolutely certain, that no one was watching, that I was alone with my thoughts, and yet here they were, documented, described, analyzed. There were pages about my childhood, about my first day of school. I was wearing a blue dress. I was crying. My mother had to peel my hands off her leg. I'd forgotten that memory, but here it was, written down in that precise handwriting. Described better than I could describe it myself. Pages about a birthday party when I was 7, about the moment I realized my parents' marriage was failing. It was a Tuesday evening. I was in my room. I could hear them fighting downstairs. I pressed my ear against the door to listen. I'd never told anyone that, but here it was, documented, analyzed, assigned emotional significance by someone else. There were pages about my teenage years, about the boy I loved in high school, James Matthews. I had a crush on him for 3 years and never told a soul. He graduated before I even worked up the courage to talk to him. I'd moved on years ago. But here, in these notes, Was every conversation I'd never had with him, every fantasy, every imagined future, written down, documented, like they were real events that had actually happened. There were pages about my college years, about the night I almost, did something I regret, something I was ashamed of, something I'd buried so deep in my mind that I barely acknowledged it to myself, but it was here, written down, analyzed, turned into a learning moment. A growth opportunity in my author's eyes, all of it documented, all of it recorded, all of it written in clinical language, like my entire life was a case file, a study, an experiment, and the most recent pages, the ones written after my experiment at the hardware store. They went beyond observation. They started predicting my behavior, not as guesses, but as certainty, like whoever was writing had studied me so completely, so thoroughly, that they could predict my actions before I even knew I was going to take them. Margaret will spend tomorrow alone. She will attempt to contact me through her written notes. She will feel a mixture of fear and relief when I respond. She will begin to understand the nature of our relationship. She will begin to accept it. She is learning, growing, becoming aware. By day 7, she will have stopped fighting. She will have accepted that her life is my narrative, and narratives require authorship. By day 10, she will begin to see me, not physically, but spiritually. She will recognize that I am not her captor, I am her creator. We will be reunited soon, when she is finally ready. I have waited so long for this, for her to understand. And I did, all of those things, every prediction, every speculation about my future behavior was accurate, which meant that whoever was writing this wasn't just documenting my past, they were controlling my future. Or at least predicting it so accurately that it felt like the same thing, which raised an even more terrifying question. Did I have free will, or was I just a character following a script? Becoming increasingly aware that the script existed, but helpless to deviate from it, I closed the folder. My heart was racing, not because I was afraid anymore, but because I understood, on some level. I wasn't sure where the observation ended and where I began, what choices were mine, what choices had been authored for me. What was free will, and what was just me following a script that someone else had written for me years ago. That night, I didn't write another note, and for 3 days, no new pages appeared, no new documentation. The silence was louder than anything else had been. It was the sound of a story pausing, waiting, holding its breath, like my author was waiting to see what I would do, like this was a test, the final test, the moment where I would either accept my reality or rebel against it. On the 4th day, a final package appeared on my kitchen table. It wasn't the usual folder. It was a small box, wrapped carefully, professionally even. My name was written on top in that same handwriting. Margaret Ellen Westbrook, the character who became real. Inside, I found a leather-bound journal, blank pages, all of them, and a letter. Written on actual stationery. Not just pages torn from a notebook. The stationery had a watermark. Expensive, deliberate. The letter read, "You now have a choice, one final choice. One final choice, the only choice that was ever yours to make. Inside this journal, I have prepared the final pages of your story." The ending. There are 2 possible endings, and you must choose which one becomes real. The rest of your life, every moment that comes after, will depend on this choice. But I can tell you this, both endings are possible, both are true, and both are authored. The only difference is which author you choose to believe. You can accept me. Accept that your life has been guided by an outside force, that your choices have been observed and predicted, and find peace in that knowledge. Or you can reject me. You can assert your autonomy. You can try to write your own ending, and face the uncertainty of a life written by no one but yourself, the burden of absolute free will. Which ending do you choose, Margaret, the one I have written, or the one you will write? I held the journal in my hands for a very long time. Murphy was watching me again, that same expression in his eyes, that same mixture of concern and understanding, like he'd always known something I was only now learning, like he'd been waiting for this moment, waiting for me to choose. I opened the journal. The first page had 2 paragraphs. 2 possible endings to my life. 2 possible futures. 2 possible truths about who I was and why I was here. In the first ending, I had been the subject of an elaborate psychological study, a long-term experiment conducted by a mysterious therapist named Dr. S. Harlow. The documentation was real. The observation was real, but the purpose was to help me, to understand myself better, to guide me toward becoming the best version of myself. All the predictions, all the documentation, all the surveillance, it was for my own good, to protect me, to help me grow. In this ending, Dr. Harlow was a guardian angel, a force of good, and I would learn to be grateful, to accept the guidance, to let someone else author my life because it was better than the mess I would make of it myself. In the second ending, I was not a person at all. I was a fictional character. A creation in someone else's story. My memories weren't real. My choices weren't real. My life wasn't real. Everything I thought I knew about myself was just narrative, just prose written by someone else for their own purposes. In this ending, I would reject the journal. I would walk away. I would try to write my own story, knowing that I could never be sure if I was actually free or just playing out a predetermined narrative. I would live in uncertainty, in fear, in the knowledge that somewhere, someone might still be taking notes about me, might still be predicting my choices, might still believe they are authoring my life. I couldn't read past those 2 paragraphs. My eyes wouldn't focus on the rest of the text, because I understood, on some level, that reading the rest of the story, making this final choice, would determine something fundamental about my reality. It would determine not just my future, but the nature of my present and my past. Murphy whimpered, a small sound, barely audible, but enough to pull me back from the edge, enough to make me put the journal down. And here's where I'm asking you. Here's where I need your help. What would you do? Would you read the rest of the story and choose one of the endings, accepting whatever reality that implies? Or would you refuse? Would you put the journal down and walk away, choosing not to know, choosing to live in the uncertainty because I haven't read past those first 2 paragraphs yet? And I'm not sure I ever will. I'm sitting here, in my apartment in Portland, with the journal on the table in front of me, Murphy's head on my knee, and the biggest question of my life hanging in the air between me and whatever comes next. Because here's the thing about being observed. The thing I've learned through all of this, the thing that keeps me awake at 3 in the morning. Once you know you're being watched, you can never stop wondering if you're still being watched now, if this moment, right now, is being documented, if someone, somewhere, is taking notes about you. Listening to this story, wondering what you would choose, predicting your choices, maybe even authoring your response before you even know what it will be. So tell me in the comments, what would you choose, read the ending, or close the book? Because your answer, right now, in this moment, it matters more than you know, maybe more than anything has ever mattered. And here's the real question, the one that will keep you up at night just like it keeps me up. How do you know you're not already in someone else's story, right now, at this very moment? How do you know your choices are yours, and not someone else's narrative design? The page I'm reading, is it real? Are you real? Am I real? Or are we all just characters, sitting in different rooms across different times, reading the same story, making the same choice, over and over again, forever? Because the scariest part of this entire ordeal, the thing that haunts me more than anything else, is that I've started to wonder, what if there's no journal at all? What if this has always been my story? What if I've always been the one writing these notes, documenting my own life? And I've just finally become aware of it. What if my author is me? What if you're listening to this story right now, and somewhere, somehow, you're also writing about yourself, documenting your own existence, and you just haven't realized it yet? What if we're all authors of our own lives, but too afraid to look at what we've written? The notebook is still on the table, in my apartment in Portland, and every single morning, like clockwork, a new page appears. But now, I'm the one leaving it there, and I'm the one reading it the next day. And I still don't know if I'm choosing to do this, or if someone else is choosing it for me. And that's the ending of this story, not with resolution, but with the lingering question, the one that echoes long after the words have faded. Who is really in control, your author, or you? Story number, story 2. I'm about to tell you about something that happened to me 3 months ago, something that changed how I see the roads I drive every day. And here's the thing. I still don't know if I made it home that night, or if I'm still out there somewhere, telling myself this story. Before you listen to what comes next, I need you to promise me something. If you recognize any part of this, if any of it sounds familiar, you have to tell me in the comments. Because I think I'm not the only person this has happened to, and I think maybe that matters. In fact, I know for a fact it matters, because I found proof, and that proof is scarier than the original story. The story now begins. The thing about living near Massachusetts is that you stop noticing the weird. I've passed through the Bridgewater area maybe 200 times in my life, 200 times without incident. That matters somehow. It matters because when something finally goes wrong, you don't expect it. You think you've earned a kind of immunity through repetition. I was driving home from my sister's place in Providence on a Tuesday evening in August. It was that strange hour when the sun isn't quite gone, but the sky's already turned this bruised purple color, the kind of light that makes everything look slightly wrong. The trees look too tall, the power lines sag too low, and I remember actually thinking at that moment that the world looked like it was being seen through old glass. The kind of glass that warps things just slightly, just enough that you notice something's off but can't quite put your finger on what. My phone was at 30% battery. I remember this detail specifically because I considered pulling over to charge it before heading back. But I didn't. I was tired. I'd been at my sister's for 6 hours listening to her explain why her new job was better than her old job. We'd had the same conversation 3 months ago when she started the job. I knew how it would end. I knew which stories she would tell me, and I think maybe that's why I was so tired, not physically, but in that deeper way. The way you get tired when you're living the same day over and over again. So I just plugged in my AirPods and decided the drive would wake me up. That's what I told myself anyway. I took Route 24 south, the way I always do, but that Tuesday something was different. The traffic was heavier than usual. Nothing catastrophic, just unusual for that time of night. A line of cars stretching ahead of me, everyone moving at about 45 miles an hour. I remember thinking someone must have crashed. There's always a crash on Route 24. It's that road. You know the one. The road where accidents happen like clockwork, every few weeks, every month like clockwork. But there was no accident. The cars just kept going, and the traffic just kept crawling. After about 10 minutes of this, my GPS navigation announced that my route would take an additional 23 minutes due to traffic conditions. I could take an alternate route and save 16 minutes. I almost turned it down. I almost stayed on Route 24 like I always do. But 16 minutes, that's almost a quarter hour. And I was so tired. And I was thinking about my sister. About how we talked about the same things. About how I'd listened to the same stories. And I thought maybe if I saved 16 minutes, I could use those 16 minutes to do something different. Something I hadn't done yet. Something that would prove I wasn't just a recording of myself going through the motions. My voice sounded hoarse somehow. When's the last time I'd actually spoken out loud at my sister's place? I'd mostly listened. I'd mostly sat there and watched her move around her kitchen, making coffee, opening the refrigerator, doing all the small things that prove you're a real person living a real life, and I'd barely said anything. Alternate route accepted, my phone said back to me, recalculating. The GPS rerouted me onto side roads I'd never taken before, smaller roads. The kind with names that sound like last names. Haven Road, Hayward Street, Old Bridge Path. I wasn't suspicious yet. Not really. GPS does this all the time. It finds the pockets in the map that most people don't use, the shortcut arteries that run underneath the main highways. The veins instead of the arteries. The quiet routes instead of the loud ones. But as I drove, I started noticing something. The light was staying the same. That bruised purple should have faded by now, should have turned dark. Should have given way to streetlights and headlights painting the world in amber and white. But it was just maintaining itself. Like someone had taken a photograph of the sky and wrapped it around me. I checked my clock on the dashboard, 7:47 p.m. I checked it again 2 minutes later, 7:49. And 2 minutes after that, 7:51. So time was moving fine. Time was doing what time does. But the light wasn't responding to time the way light responds to time in the real world. There should have been a progression, a movement. But instead, it was like we were stuck in a moment. A permanent moment of almost night. And the trees. God. The trees, they were getting thicker, more dense. The road was narrowing in response, like the forest was slowly swallowing the asphalt. I was passing through what must have been a preserved area or a state forest or something. But the forest didn't feel preserved. It felt awake. The way a sleeping person wakes up sometimes, not gradually, but with a sudden alertness. A consciousness that wasn't there a moment before. I started noticing things about the trees, specific things. They all seemed to be leaning in slightly. Toward the road, toward my car. And the branches had a pattern to them. At first I thought it was just how tree branches happen to grow, random, chaotic, following the laws of nature. But the more I looked at them, the more I realized they weren't random at all. They were spelling something out, a language made of wood and leaves, a message that was almost readable if you looked at it just right. My phone's battery dropped to 25%. The music in my AirPods started cutting out, not dying exactly, just glitching. Dropping out for half-second intervals before coming back. Familiar songs starting to sound off somehow, wrong timings, slightly different lyrics. I was listening to a Coldplay song I've heard maybe 500 times, and I would have sworn the words were different, would have absolutely sworn it. The melody was right, but the words were all shifted, like someone had taken the song apart and put it back together slightly wrong on purpose. I told myself it was just a connection issue. My phone was probably overheating. iPhones do that sometimes. They panic when the battery gets low. They start making mistakes. They start doing things that don't match the expected behavior of the electronic device. The GPS still showed my destination, 17 minutes away. But I'd been driving for 25 minutes already. I checked the screen to see if I'd somehow taken a wrong turn. The phone showed me as a little blue dot, right on the route it had given me. The route that should have saved me 16 minutes. And yet, I wasn't saving any time. I was losing time. Time was doing something weird. It was moving differently than it should have been. Like I was driving through a medium that was thicker than air. Like the minutes were moving more slowly than they should. That's when I saw the first one, another car, parked on the side of the road, just sitting there, empty. The doors were open, both front doors, and the headlights were on. And the engine was running. I could tell the engine was running because I could see the exhaust coming out of the back of the car, that little shimmer that means something's burning fuel, something's consuming energy, something's still alive. I slowed down as I drove past it. I tried to see inside. Tried to see if there was anyone in the driver's seat. But it was too dark. The interior of the car was just black, just a void. And I remember actually thinking at that moment, where did the driver go? The road turned. And the road split, not forked, exactly, split. There were two paths forward, both equally wide, both equally paved, both equally real. My GPS didn't seem to notice the split existed. The blue dot on my phone just kept moving straight ahead, as if the split wasn't there. As if the road was still just one road instead of two separate roads leading to two separate places. I took the left path because left felt safer somehow, because when you're unsure you make choices that feel like they make sense in the moment, and left has always felt safer to me than right. I learned that from somewhere, maybe my mother. She used to say left was the direction of the heart, and hearts could be trusted. That you should trust your left side instincts before your right side instincts. My mother has been dead for 5 years. I don't know why that thought came to me then. But it did. It came to me so clearly, and it made me realize something. It made me realize that I was being driven by instincts, that I was making choices without actually deciding to make them, that something else was moving the car. Something else was steering. No, that's not quite right. I was steering, but my hands felt like they belonged to someone else, like I was watching myself from somewhere outside my own body. The road got darker, the trees got closer, and that purple light, it was finally fading, but not into darkness. It was fading into a kind of gray. The kind of gray that exists in old photographs. The kind of gray that doesn't feel real because nothing that's actually alive produces that shade of gray. It's the color of things that have been dead for a very long time. The color of memory. The color of things we've forgotten but our brains still remember. My phone dropped to 20%, and I saw another car. This one was actually abandoned on the shoulder, completely abandoned. No engine running, just sitting there, with nothing inside it. And I noticed something about this car. I noticed that it was the same model as mine, the same color, the same year probably. It was like looking at myself from a different timeline, from a version of my life where I'd made different choices. I didn't stop. I kept driving. I was alone. I need you to understand this before we move forward. I was completely alone in my car, just me and the road and the trees and whatever was happening to the light. But around the 12-minute mark of this nightmare journey, I became aware of something sitting in my passenger seat. Not suddenly. Not with a jolt or a gasp. It was more like remembering, like I'd known there was someone there all along and I was just now catching up to my own awareness. The way you sometimes walk into a room and find someone sitting there and you realize they've been there the whole time. You just weren't paying attention. I didn't look at them, not directly, but I could see them in my peripheral vision, in the blurred edges of my sight, a shape, a presence, wearing something dark, or maybe the darkness was just coming from them. Maybe they weren't wearing anything. Maybe they just looked like night, looked like a person. You took the left road, they said. Their voice was quiet, almost gentle, almost like my sister's voice actually, just slightly wrong, slightly off-key, like a cover band playing a famous song. All the notes are right, but something is missing. Something fundamental about the original is gone forever. I'm lost, I said. I don't know why I answered. Should have just ignored them. But I answered like it was the most natural thing in the world to have a conversation with someone I couldn't properly see. Like this was normal. Like this was something that happened every day. You're not lost. They shifted in their seat. I could feel them shifting. The car moved slightly with their weight. The suspension reacted. Physics responded. They were real enough to have mass. You're exactly where you're supposed to be. The GPS took you exactly where the GPS takes everyone when they ask for an alternate route in the Bridgewater Triangle. The Bridgewater Triangle. The name hung in the air like a question mark made of ice. I'd heard rumors about this place, urban legend stuff. The kind of things people talk about on late-night forums and Reddit threads at 3 in the morning when they can't sleep. I'd never believed in it. Or I had believed in it the way you believe in things that are probably fake. with one part of your brain completely skeptical and another part terrified. "That's not real," I said. "That's just a thing people talk about online. Urban legend stuff. People make things up to feel special. To feel like they know something the rest of the world doesn't know. Urban legends exist somewhere." They leaned their head back against the headrest. I could hear the whisper of their neck against the fabric. It was such a human sound, so ordinary. That's what people don't understand about them. They don't exist in reality. They exist in spaces where reality's a little thinner. Places like this, roads like this, times like this. And GPS. GPS is just a way to find the thin spaces, to navigate to them. You ask for an alternate route. You ask the system to show you something different. Something faster, something better. And if you're in certain places, if you're in places where the walls between things are thinner, the GPS will show you exactly what you asked for. I tried to understand what they were saying. I tried to make sense of the words, but they kept slipping away from me, like trying to remember a dream after you've woken up. The harder you try to hold on to it, the faster it escapes. "I want to wake up," I said. I wasn't even sure if I was talking to them anymore or to myself. "This isn't real. I'm going to wake up, and it's going to be Tuesday morning, and my alarm is going to go off, and I'm going to get ready for work, and none of this is going to have happened." "You're not asleep," they said it so kindly, so gently. Like they were telling me my dinner was ready, or that the weather looked nice today. Like they were delivering the most natural piece of information in the world. But I understand why you'd want to be. I'd want to be too, if I were you. Being awake is harder. Being awake means accepting that the world is stranger than you thought it was. Being awake means accepting that there are places, there are roads, there are routes on maps that show you how to get to places that shouldn't exist. My phone dropped to 18%. Angry, warning me that I was running out of time. But time had already run out. Time had already stopped meaning anything. "I know you," I said, and I did know them. I was starting to understand that. I was starting to recognize the shape of them, the presence. This person wasn't a stranger. This person was me, or a version of me, or what I would become if I stayed on this road long enough. The road turned, sharp left, so sharp that the trees seemed to lean inward with the turn, the branches reaching across the road like fingers, like the forest was trying to hold me there. And when we came around the corner, there was a house, just sitting there, in the middle of the forest, yellow light spilling out from the windows like something warm and living, a farmhouse maybe, or a cottage, the kind of place where someone has lived for a very long time, where the walls have absorbed decades of stories, decades of lives, decades of people making decisions and then living with those decisions. And I recognized this place, not from real life, not from memories, but from the way you recognize something in a dream, from some part of your brain that exists outside of experience. The house looked exactly like I would have designed a house to look if I'd been asked to build my childhood trauma in architectural form. There was a mailbox in front of the house, one of those old-fashioned ones, red, with the name on the side in faded letters. I couldn't quite read it from where I was sitting, but I knew what it said. I knew that it said my name, or a version of my name, or the name of someone I used to be. My phone dropped to 15%. "You can stop here," the passenger said. "If you want. The GPS won't know the difference. It'll just keep showing your destination getting closer, and you can stay here instead. Stay in the gray light. Stay where things make sense in the way they don't make sense anywhere else. Most people stop here. Eventually. Most people take this route and they see this house and they think maybe this is where they're supposed to be. Maybe this is where they've been trying to get to their whole lives. And they stop, and they get out of their car, and they walk into the house." "And then what?" I asked. "And then they never leave," the passenger said. "They live in the house, they live in the gray light, they live in the moment between Tuesday evening and Wednesday morning forever, and every so often someone else takes the GPS route. Someone else asks for an alternate route in the Bridgewater Triangle. And when they see the house, they see all of us, the people who stayed, the people who got out of their cars, all of us looking out the windows, waiting, watching, wondering if maybe one day we'll be brave enough to get back in the car and keep driving." I didn't stop. I pressed the accelerator, not hard, but firm, deliberate, and the car lurched forward like it had been waiting for me to give it permission to move. Like it had always known that I would choose this, that I would keep driving, that I would not stop at the house of gray light and dead things. The passenger didn't leave, but they stopped talking. They just sat there in the gray light, and we drove through trees that started to look less like trees and more like suggestions of trees, like the concept of trees without any of the details filled in. And I started to actually wonder if maybe I was the only real thing in this entire landscape, if maybe everything else was just my brain trying to make sense of something it couldn't understand. We drove for what felt like hours, but my phone still said we were 17 minutes away. And then it said 16, and then 15. The destination counter was moving, time was moving, we were getting closer. The light got warmer, the color came back. First the purple, then deeper blues, then the black of actual night. Real night, night with stars. Night with substance, and weight, and meaning. I could see constellations. I could see the Big Dipper. I could see Orion the Hunter. I could see all the things that prove that the universe is real and that I'm actually living in it. The trees started looking like real trees again, with bark and leaves and the specific kind of wrongness that normal trees have when you look at them too long. The good kind of wrongness, the kind that belongs to the world as it actually is. My phone buzzed, back to 22% somehow. The battery had started recharging. My GPS announced in that smooth artificial voice, "You have arrived at your destination," and I was on my street. My real street, lined with houses I recognize. Streetlights I've seen 10,000 times. My driveway coming up on the right, the porch light on, just like I always leave it. Just like a beacon saying, "Welcome home, you made it, you're back." I pulled in and turned off the engine. The passenger seat was empty. When I reached over to touch it, it was cold. Not the cold of an unheated car, the cold of something that had never been warm. The cold of a place that had been empty of heat for a very long time. I got out of the car on shaky legs. I walked to my front door on shaky legs, and I went inside my house. Everything was exactly as I'd left it. Everything was exactly the same. But I knew something had changed. Something fundamental had shifted. I had gone somewhere. I had driven through a place where roads split and forests sang in languages made of branches. I had seen a house in the gray light. I had seen what happened to people who stayed. I checked my phone. 17 minutes had passed since I'd accepted the alternate route. It takes 23 minutes to drive from my sister's house to my house on Route 24. I had somehow beaten physics. I had somehow cheated the rules of time and distance. I had somehow driven faster than light through a route that didn't actually exist. 3 days after this happened, I was at the grocery store, standing in the produce section, trying to decide between 2 containers of blueberries, and I looked up and saw someone across the store, partially hidden by a display of apples. They were watching me. They looked like the passenger from my car. Not exactly, but close enough that I knew. They gave me a small wave, a gesture of recognition, like an old friend, like someone who knew me from another life, another timeline, another version of events. I dropped the blueberries. I left them there on the floor, and I walked out of the store without buying anything. When I got home, I started researching. I went down every rabbit hole, every internet forum, every Reddit thread about the Bridgewater Triangle, and I found stories. Dozens of stories, hundreds of stories, people talking about taking wrong turns, about accepting alternate routes, about seeing things that didn't make sense. But what really got me, what really made my blood go cold, was what I found in the comments sections. People posting about me, about my drive, about the passenger seat of my car. People saying, "I was on that same road that night. I saw his car. I've seen him. The passenger. I've seen him in other cars, on other roads, helping other people through the in-between places." And then I did something I shouldn't have done. I checked my GPS history. The route I took that night, it didn't exist. It wasn't recorded anywhere. My phone had no memory of it. It was like the journey never happened, like I'd imagined the whole thing. But I know it happened. I know it because sometimes when I'm driving at dusk, that strange purple hour, I see abandoned cars on the side of the road. I see them from the corner of my eye, and they're all the same model as mine, all the same color. And sometimes I slow down and look at them, and I see faces in the windows. They're looking back at me. 2 weeks after the grocery store incident, I couldn't take it anymore. I started going to the library, the old library, the one downtown that has archives, newspaper records, historical documents. I didn't even know what I was looking for at first, but I knew that if this thing was real, if this phenomenon was actually happening, then there had to be evidence, there had to be a trail. I started with missing persons reports, just searching through decades of them, looking for clusters, looking for patterns, and I found them. In August 1987, in August 1992, in August 2001, in August 2009, and in August of this year, every 5 to 8 years, a cluster of missing persons reports, all from people who drove through the Bridgewater area, all on Tuesday evenings, all between 7 p.m. and 8 p.m. All of them having reported last being seen taking an alternate route on their GPS, or, in the older cases, consulting printed maps or asking for directions. The librarian, this old woman named Margaret, she noticed me writing down all these dates. She asked me what I was researching, and I almost didn't tell her, but something about her, something about the way she was looking at me, made me think she already knew. "The thin road," she said quietly. "That's what people call it locally, the route that appears when you ask for it. The path that doesn't show up on maps because it exists in the cracks between maps. Between reality. You know about this?" I asked. She nodded slowly. "My daughter took that route in 1989, she said. She called me from her car. She said the roads were wrong. She said the light wasn't right." And then the call cut out. I never heard from her again. But 3 days later I got a postcard, in her handwriting. It just said, "I'm staying in the gray. I'm staying where things make more sense. Don't try to find me. Don't take the route. Just tell people. Tell them not to accept the alternate route." I felt my stomach drop. "Is she?" I couldn't finish the sentence. "She's either dead or she's in that house in the gray light. I've made peace with not knowing which." I told her about my experience. All of it. The passenger. The house. The faces in the cars. Everything. And she nodded like she'd heard it all before. Because she probably had. "There are others who know," she said. "Not many. But some. People whose loved ones vanished. People who've taken the route and survived. We have a private group. We share information. We try to warn people. But the internet makes it too easy for people to dismiss it as fiction, as a creepypasta, as just another internet story." She gave me the names of 7 people who had direct experience with the thin road. She gave me their contact information. I reached out to all of them. Here's what I learned when I started talking to the others. The first person was a man named David from Boston. He took the route in 1997. He said the experience was identical to mine except for one detail. He said when he looked in the passenger seat, he could see through the person sitting there, like they were a ghost, like they were a projection made of light. "I realized," David said to me over the phone, his voice still shaking after all these years, "that the passenger wasn't a person. It was a message. It was the road communicating with me. The route had consciousness or something close to it, and it was trying to show me something, trying to explain what was happening." The second person was a woman named Rachel. She took the route in 2007, and here's the thing about Rachel. She didn't drive through it and escape back to reality like I did. She stopped at the house. She got out of the car. She walked inside, and she came back out. She said the inside of the house was infinite, that the rooms went on forever. That she walked through hallways that seemed to duplicate themselves. That she saw other people, the people who had stopped there over the years, all of them standing in rooms, all of them alive but not quite present, like they were made of the gray light. Like they had become part of the landscape. They were waiting for me to make a choice, Rachel said. They wanted to know if I was going to stay or if I was going to leave. And when I chose to leave, when I walked back to my car and started driving again, I felt them urging me forward. Like they were pushing the car, like they wanted me to escape, like they wanted proof that escape was possible. The third person was an older man named Frank. He took the route in 1979. He said back then GPS didn't exist. He said he was following a route written down by a gas station attendant. An attendant who looked wrong, who moved in ways that suggested unfamiliarity with how human bodies work. I realized later, Frank said, that the gas station itself might not have existed. That the attendant might have been something waiting by the side of the road to give lost travelers directions to the thin place. The thin place has been here a long time, longer than GPS, longer than phones, longer than cars probably. GPS just activated it in a new way, made it easier to find. I talked to the others too. Each one had variations on the story, different details, different interpretations, but the core narrative was always the same. There was a route. The route existed in the cracks of reality. And if you accepted it, if you followed it, you would see things that couldn't be explained by normal physics. And here's the thing that really terrified me. Most of them reported seeing me, not my name, not my face specifically, but they all described a person who matched my description. Sitting in cars, appearing on the side of the road, standing in the gray light, always looking, always watching, always seeming to be looking for someone. "You're the passenger," Rachel said to me, or "You're going to be the passenger," or "You were the passenger." Time doesn't work right on that road. Past and future don't mean what they mean here. You might be driving the road right now in some timeline, and you might be riding in cars as the passenger in other timelines, and you might be standing in the gray light waiting for rescue that will never come, all at the same time. I haven't driven since that night. I take public transportation now, buses, trains, anything that doesn't involve me making route decisions, anything that doesn't involve me asking a GPS for an alternate path. But I see them. I see the passengers. I see them on buses sometimes, sitting, watching, cold. And I know they're watching me specifically, like they're trying to communicate something across the space between us. And here's the thing that keeps me up at night. Here's the thing that makes me need to record this story and put it on YouTube and pray that people will listen. I started checking my GPS history again, And I started noticing something. I started noticing that routes I've never taken are appearing in my GPS history. Routes I would never have searched for. Routes that go through the Bridgewater Triangle. Routes that show I've been there multiple times, even though I haven't left my house except to take the bus. And the timestamps on these routes, they're from times when I was asleep. Someone, or something, is using my GPS. Someone is routing through the thin place. Someone is driving while I'm sleeping. And I have a terrible suspicion about who that someone is. I think the passenger never left my car. I think they've been with me ever since that night. I think they've been waiting for me to fall asleep, waiting for me to lower my guard. And I think they're trying to show me something. They're trying to show me the routes, the paths, the way back to that house in the gray light. And the worst part, the absolute worst part, is that I'm starting to want to go back. I'm starting to recognize the pattern. The way home isn't through the routes my GPS suggests. Home isn't my apartment. Home is the gray light. Home is the moment between dusk and night. Home is the house where all the other passengers are waiting. So here's what I need you to do. I need you to check your GPS right now. I need you to look at your location history. I need you to see if there are routes there that you don't remember taking. Routes that appeared during times when you were sleeping. Because if there are routes in your history that don't belong there, then you need to understand something. The passenger isn't unique to me. The passenger isn't unique to any one person. The passenger is something that travels through the GPS network. It's something that moves from device to device. It's something that's looking for people who are ready, people who are tired of the real world, people who need escape. And if you see those routes in your history, if you recognize this happening to you, don't accept the next alternate route offer. Don't ask your GPS for directions. Don't look for shortcuts through the Bridgewater Triangle. Because once you go through, once you see the house in the gray light, you're marked, you're chosen, you're part of the network, and the passenger will keep coming back until you make a choice, until you decide whether you're going to stay or whether you're going to keep running. But here's what I want you to know. Here's what I need you to understand. I'm not sure I'm going to keep running much longer. Last night, I fell asleep in my car in my driveway. I don't know how it happened. I don't remember going out to my car, but I woke up and I was driving. I was on a road I didn't recognize, and the GPS was showing my destination 17 minutes away, and in the passenger seat there was someone, and this time I looked directly at them, and the face I saw looking back at me, it was my own. Tell me in the comments if this has happened to you. Tell me if you've seen your own face in the gray light. Tell me if the passenger is sitting in your car right now. Tell me if you're still out there. Tell me if you're still real. Sweet dreams.